Dr. Leanne Mauriello. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Thanks. So glad to be here.
For our listeners who may not be familiar with you and your work, who are you and what do you do?
I am, by training, a behavior change scientist. I like to think of myself, though, more as maybe a lifestyle medicine pioneer. My work really focuses at the intersection of behavior change and lifestyle medicine and digital health. And really, my passion, it's typically always in some way related back to empowering and supporting individuals to make meaningful and lasting behavior change through a variety of different projects and places of employment throughout my career. Really have had amazing opportunities to really develop programs that can help individuals stay healthy, get healthy, and keep them on that track, because so much of our country is struggling with chronic disease.
What I would like to do, Leanne, I'd like to get into behavior change science. What is it? How can it benefit the average person? Lifestyle medicine, the concept is food is medicine, and then digital health, what that is, how that affects the average person. But before we do that, let's start back all the way from the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Pennsylvania.
Really?
And actually, I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania. Once I went to college and graduate school, it kind of wasn't on the radar until that sitcom The Office came out. So I grew up not too far from Scranton, Pennsylvania, that now everybody is aware of because of that wonderful show that I love when I'm like traveling in a hotel and there's reruns on, right? So not far from Scranton, Pennsylvania.
We need some Dwight. That's awesome.
Yes, exactly.
How did you first get into behavior change science? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I kind of knew pretty early in my life that I was interested in the general field of psychology. In high school, I had the opportunity to take an advanced placement class in psychology. And as a freshman at Connecticut College in New London, Connecticut, I was able to, since I took that AP psychology class, I was able to take an elective. And I chose health psychology. It was being taught by Dr. Joan Chrysler, who ended up being a really important mentor in my life. And she really inspired me. The course inspired me, and I joined her research group as an undergrad. So I had the opportunity to start doing research and traveling to conferences within the field of health psychology, even as an undergraduate. And so that really kind of solidified me wanting to go into graduate school and focus on that.
So behavior change, I think some of the hardest things in anything from diet, exercise, even on the jujitsu mat, to change your behavior. And especially I see as people get older, they get more stuck in their ways to a degree where it is so hard to change your routine and what you do in that comfort level. Like just as a human being, does that make sense? Like it's so hard.
Oh yeah.
Like we're so habitual. And one of my mentors says like a habit turns into a groove that turns into a rut that slowly turns into a grave. So like behavior change, why is it so hard to change behaviors in just about anything, and especially food and diet? Like, could you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, as you alluded to, we're creatures of habit, right? We get into routines, and there is a lot of friction that we encounter when we get really accustomed to doing something a certain way. Just like people almost could get not addicted in a bad way, but like for some people, running or exercise becomes something that they must do every day, right? For others that maybe get off of that track or get so accustomed to not moving. And then, as you mentioned, as they get older and realize for their health and well-being, they need to move more, it's really difficult to change the way that you behave. And why it's so important is that we know that so much of chronic disease right now is related to our lifestyle behavior and our lifestyle risks, right? We know a lot of us aren't that healthy. We know a lot of people have more than one health behavior that they could probably use to do better with. And so a lot of times it becomes overwhelming also because we don't know where to start, right? Or we maybe know what we want as an outcome. We want to lose weight. We want to have more energy. We want to look different, but we have to like distill that down to actually a behavior to change. And a lot of times, you know, as we're just living our lives, we're thinking about what we want, how we want the outcome to be different, but aren't really that clear on what do we have to do to get there.
Yeah, and you see that that behavior change is so hard. Like even like I brought up jujitsu. You're on the mat and you're rolling with somebody, and you're just so used to doing certain moves, and then it's so hard to implement new moves in your game, especially if you train for a while. You have a set group of moves you're comfortable with, and then put another move into that comfort zone takes months and months of practice, and you literally have to stop and be comfortable being bad for a while before it's proficient, right? And then
Yep.
even like with like diet, like
Diet. Yep.
you don't like, oh, like I like someone's like, well, I don't like salad or I don't like vegetables or whatever. Like they just there's a general category like they just don't touch. And it's so hard to implement that into their day-to-day system. Where does that come from? And then what are some best practices to maybe change our behavior and how to get the process going to maybe a more optimal level? If you could speak to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, diet's a great example because a lot of, so where does that come from? Again, I think we fall into routines or habits, right? Our diet is often influenced by our upbringing, maybe our cultural influences. We know kind of going to college and then becoming young adults, sometimes those dietary preferences and patterns change, but we fall into a trap, right? And in America, at least, there's this reality that we kind of have this standard American diet, also known as SAD, right? And all of the norms and the foods around us, everything is supersized, right? And processed and ultra processed. And so I think that's how we so easily fall into a routine where so much of what we're consuming is doing harm rather than benefit. And I think diet's a great example, right? A lot of times people will stop and say, maybe they grab a high caloric intake espresso latte on the way to work or something, right? Or and grab a breakfast sandwich, and lunch, maybe it's fast food because they're on the road, whatever that might be. And then maybe we stop and say like, gosh, I want to change, right? I got to stop eating this way, right? Like think about how many times like you've heard someone say, I've got to stop eating this way. Well, what does that mean? Because eating is something we do many times a day. It is social, right? It's something that we do to respond to stress. Sometimes there's so many influences, food and what we're eating and drinking is throughout our whole day. So diet is particularly tricky because it encompasses so many different behaviors, right? What are we drinking? Are we drinking sugar sweetened beverages? Are we drinking enough water? Are we eating enough plants, right? Are we eating enough whole grains? Are we reducing processed foods, right? And so with diet, really some of the best practices are apply from like behavioral science more generally that we can distill down to diet is we need to start small and start somewhere. And so a lot of times we want this fresh start, cold turkey approach, which very rarely is successful. So, right, we see that we're coming into Halloween, Thanksgiving, the winter holidays, New Year's resolutions will be on. It's like January 1, oh, stop eating this way. Well, that's really hard and very unlikely to be successful. What we really need to do is really distill it down to a very specific small step, small behavior, and make those small steps, small successes our steps towards much bigger and longer lasting success.
Yeah, let's stop there for a second. You mentioned like the importance of if you want to accomplish a big goal, very rarely can you just go cold turkey into something where you mentioned the behavior science shows you have to start small, take small, meaning small baby steps towards a big goal. So it's like almost like that micro step, right? Like it's almost like if you want to write a book, you're not going to sit down and write the book and write 50,000 words in 3 days and like done. Like you might write 200 crappy words on the first day and maybe only use 100 of them after you do the editing process, right? And then micro steps that when you step back 6 months later, like, wow, I have half a book done. But like if you can't just go all in and say, I'm changing my diet all at once. So with that in mind, let's say you have someone that's with that standard American diet. Let's just take the average person, they're 45-year-old male, 30 pounds overweight, probably doesn't exercise, works a lot, runs his kids everywhere. Where's that person starts? Loves say they're from Philly, cheesesteaks, pizza, wings, beer. Where do they start? They go, you know what? I got to lose a little bit of weight. I got to get maybe my cholesterol's high. Where do they start to bring it to a meaningful results?
Yeah. So where I would say the best, or where science would indicate is the probably most successful way to start is, like I said, to start small, but to start where there'd be the least amount of friction and it would be as easy for that individual to make a change, right? So you mentioned cheesesteaks and fries, and right, I would recommend that person think about their day, and when they think about breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, where's the easiest point to make a change, right? Where's the easiest place for them to replace something unhealthy with something healthy, or it could be adding something, right? Like, well, yeah, if there's a salad in front, I'll eat it. So sure, I can have like a small salad every night with dinner, right? So like wherever that it has to be so individualized to be successful, wherever that easiest first step is. And the reason why is not just, arbitrary. Starting small, starting with easy things first is all around building confidence. And that's really one of the most important behavior change strategies. People who have higher self-efficacy or higher confidence to change are more likely to change. We don't just wake up on January 1 and, have more confidence because it's January 1, right? Those small steps, those small wins, is literally how we're building confidence. And that's why starting with whatever would be easiest for the person, they're going to feel, built up and excited that they were able to do that. Oh, I can do that. All right. Well, what's the next step? So that's how I'd recommend they start.
Just looking back, like in college, I had probably as horrible as a diet as anybody. And I remember I think it was a Dr. Oz book, actually, way back in the day. And he says, when you're in a supermarket, you're in a pharmacy. And I never looked at it that way. Like the supermarket, you could take the drugs that do harm or the drugs that do good. And like food is a drug. And I remember on the first switches, I stopped drinking soda maybe 20 years ago. And I started drinking the seltzers, like the flavored seltzers with no calories. And that wasn't that big of a switch. Like it wasn't dramatic. That was like my easiest first step. And it was amazing, like just how much better you felt a couple weeks later, where instead of having a soda or two a day, you replace it basically with water. And 6 months later, I even though I was still like in my 30s, I felt so good. Like I literally felt the difference a few weeks later. Like simple changes go a long way, right? I mean, I just remember when I started to eat healthier breakfast, I kind of switched to like an oatmeal with berries, which I find that tastes good. It was so easy to skip the breakfast sandwiches with cheese, sausage, bacon, and go right to that. Like you're saying like little small changes like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And Joe, for me, giving up soda was diet soda was much more difficult, right?
That's hard.
And my family thought like, oh, I'm never going to give up Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi, right? And I wasn't one of those people that like drank tons of it per day. But yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Each of us, it's personalized where that easy point is. But like you, I don't think had diet soda for about 8 years. And once you, even for those things that are more difficult, the aspects to change, once we build up that confidence, we can commit and say, you know what, even though this is going to be really hard for me, I've done X, Y, and Z. I bet I can tackle this. And typically what people need, especially in the diet, was 5 to 10 days without whatever that more difficult aspect of changing their diet is, whether that is adding something in or removing something. There's something called a palate reset. And again, that's when you maybe take a bigger step further along the trajectory and try to really cut out all processed foods, all sugars, just for 5 days. People don't realize, like you're saying, what a change you can actually feel in your body with just 5 days. When we are able to get individuals to commit to 5 days to doing some level of fasting or cutting back, or just like I said, cutting out the crap and the sugar, that can be a really meaningful exercise, because they're like, wow, I already feel better. I bet I can do this longer.
Yeah. So I want to get back to that fasting. I want to get back to that in a moment. But here's one thing I noticed when you talk about behavior change, and I just find the subject fascinating. Weight Watchers is a popular program in the United States here. There's multiple people I know that went on Weight Watchers and then they lost 30 pounds. Then they stop Weight Watchers and they gain 30 pounds. Then 2-3 years later, they go back on Weight Watchers, they lose 30 pounds. And then 7 months later, they're 30 pounds. They found the 30 pounds. Like, how does that happen? Where like they're on the program and it works, and then they just can't keep that behavior up. Could you speak to that, like scientifically? Like, where does that come from?
I can. And I'll talk about this scientifically from someone that authored a chapter in a textbook. And I used Weight Watchers as an example of a program that's how it is developed is for people who are like ready to change, right? And then, in the last couple of years, I actually worked for Weight Watchers for a period of time. So it's the right program for people who are ready to change. And so, Joe, even some of those examples of people you gave where they've done the program, they've fallen off, and they get off track and then they go back. Really, an instrumental behavior change theory to the field is this idea of stages of change, or meeting people where they're at. And I was lucky enough to study with Dr. James Francesca, who founded that model in the late 70s, early 80s. And that that idea of that model that's now applied internationally is meeting people where they are and helping them do the really important behavior change strategies that are before changing. So it's about doing that early preparation work and doing the stuff that's before actually changing your behavior, right? Changing your mindset, changing the way you're thinking about that behavior, changing the way why you want to work towards that behavior, right? It's all that more cognitive, emotional aspect. And I mean, it sounds intense, but it's not really. I mean, you can reflect on things, right? Think about like, well, why do I even want to do this? And why that model was so important is because a lot of programs that existed were like Weight Watchers, right? They assumed you walk in and you're ready to go. And the program just it's not built to help people with all of those early behavior change steps. So a lot of times people who do programs like Weight Watcher, they jump in and out like full throttle without doing some of that early preparation work that is really that foundation, right? When you think about like going on a vacation, you don't just go to the airport and hop on a plane. You do all that pre-work and that packing and that planning and the itinerary. So when you get there, you have a successful trip. It's kind of similar like with Weight Watchers. It's like every time you take a vacation, just going to the airport and hopping on the plane without being ready. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And then I think too, where I think just a human being falls down is there's an author, John A. Cuff, and he has a saying, what do you do the day after perfect ends? Let's say you don't want to smoke and you quit smoking and you didn't smoke for 21 days. And then that 22nd day is a really rough day. When your kid's sick, the job's stressful, you have all this pressure on you, and you have a beer, and all of a sudden you light up and you smoke 10 cigarettes. And then they just usually a human being would jump right back into their old pattern where the day after perfect, where you can fall down, but then the ones that usually succeed say, all right, I fell down a day, that's fine. Progress isn't linear. I can jump back on. I could just have one bad day, then go back to my new habit. How is it so hard, like the day after perfect? Like, what does this research show that like when perfect ends, sometimes the new habit ends? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. We need to think about progress over perfection. I think a lot of us, it takes a lot of our like, internal capital to overcome that friction and actually make a behavior change, right? So we have a lot riding on that emotionally, really in every way. And a lot of us, it comes back to mindset. A lot of us enter it, even if maybe we wouldn't say these words, but we enter it wanting perfection to continue forever. And a lot of times, especially when we're doing behavior change outside of, working with a health coach or some sort of structured program, we're not training ourselves and entering that behavior change thinking or with the assumption we're going to fall off. It's very, very rare that anybody does any healthy behavior change 100% of the time, all the days, the rest of their life, right? But we often enter, especially in those early behavior change, weeks, months, where we're still newly adopting a behavior where we want to keep it up. We've worked really hard to get here. And as soon as we fail hard because we feel like, oh my gosh, I just blew it. I blew it. Instead of actually thinking that, well, a little tiny slip, but I've done all this work that's going to help like accelerate me right back on this path and not get back, not, kind of fall into that mindset of feeling helpless and like all hope is lost.
You mentioned you spent some time with the world-renowned Dr. Jim Prochaska.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so what did you learn from him? Yeah, tell us what were some of your main learnings that your time spent under him?
Yeah, so in graduate school, I had the ability to mentor under him and many other of the professors at the Cancer Prevention Research Center at the University of Rhode Island. And so, as I mentioned, Jim co-founded or co-developed this theory of behavior change that he and his team of colleagues at that research center studied, but then studied behavior change by talking with and personally working with those who were smoking and using tobacco. So it was really from, individuals that really informed this whole model of how we can approach behavior change in a much more incremental way and more successful way. And so, as I mentioned, some of those key learnings was this whole idea of meeting people where they are, right? It's so important when we're developing behavior change programs or we're taking on behavior change ourselves to really think about where we are and match the strategies and the actions we're going to take to where we are in that behavior change process. Decades now that this model's existed and again is used internationally, a lot of it we take for granted, but this idea of small steps, right? And using small steps to build confidence. The whole idea that we just talked about, Joe, about, how do we keep up? How do we maintain behavior change? Like one of the stages of Jim's model is maintenance, and all around how do we keep people and help people sustain. His model in theory is really now filtrated into just how we all think about behavior change. And he just has such a legacy. I actually attended his memorial. He passed away several months ago, but just attended his memorial a few weeks ago. And being able to be there in person and seeing, there was even a representative from the National Institutes of Health that was his program officer, because Jim led, hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to study behavior change, and really just seeing that visible presence of the strong legacy he leaves. I'm just so grateful to have studied. And then I worked for a company he founded, Pro Change Behavior Systems, and spent about 12 years there. So really got even beyond graduate school to work really closely with him and his team in not only studying, but really for me, that important piece of applying these strategies to developing digital programs and developing health coaching protocols that enable so many around the globe to help people be more successful with behavior change than we were able to be several decades ago.
I want to touch on digital health in a second, but getting back, you mentioned smoking, about the data. There's a few people I know that are highly educated, great people, but they can't kick the smoking habit. Why is smoking so hard to kick? And do you have any best practices you learned with your time under Jim on like how the average person can stop smoking, or at least reduce the amount they smoke?
Yeah. So much of that is about the addictive nature, right? It's similar to, now we kind of have an epidemic of folks being addicted to processed foods, right? So very similarly, tobacco, right? We know chemically changes the brain, and it is that like endorphin rush, right? And so that's why it is so terribly difficult to change. It has become easier because our social norms have changed. I was actually at a health conference held in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago, and entering my hotel, and the tobacco smoke in the casino to get to the elevator
Crazy.
was overwhelming. And it was, overwhelming, right? But when we think back a few decades ago, everywhere around,
coffee shops,
right? Exactly, right? Airplanes, right?
Yeah.
And so it's become easier because our social norms have changed. Our built environment around us is not supportive of a tobacco smoker or tobacco user. So in some ways, it's become easier to change. And really, those that are still smoking, we really can't probably find a human that's going to say smoking is healthy. They might say, everyone in my family smoked and they lived to 85. I'm going to be fine, like whatever. They might not believe it's going to kill them, but no one's going to say, yes, it's healthy. I should be doing this. So really, those that are continuing to smoke are probably those that there's always going to be a segment of the population that we're not able to help change. So sometimes that addiction is so strong, or the environment and kind of life circumstances of that individual is so stressful that maybe they're tackling other things that are more difficult or pressing to their health than tobacco. Yeah, there are challenges that we just can't overcome even with science.
Understood. You mentioned fasting a couple minutes ago. Can you speak to the benefits of intermittent fasting?
In developing culinary medicine and food as medicine and lifestyle medicine programs, fasting was an area that I and really the team I was leading at an integrated health system, we didn't enter lifestyle medicine work saying we're going to, build programs for fasting. The science has existed for decades, right? It's not necessarily a new concept. However, it coming into kind of like public light and becoming more accessible, it certainly is more recent, but there is a lot of evidence and science that supports giving our body a rest from digesting food is incredibly, incredibly helpful to not only our cardiometabolic system, our brain health, and how long we live and how well we live. And it is something that we are kind of socially acclimated to, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks, right? And kind of maybe not eating when we're sleeping, and that's about it. And what fasting shows us is that when we can extend that amount of time that we are not digesting or consuming food, really, as we increase the amount of time that we are not consuming and digesting food, we are increasing the health benefits, giving our body kind of a break. It also shortens the amount of hours by which we're consuming food. So you have less opportunity to eat unhealthy food, right? We can often cut calories just by cutting the number of hours that we're eating. Now, again, there's always exceptions, but typically for most of us, if we cut the number of hours that we're going to be eating in a day, we're going to cut the number of calories. And then we're also going to give our body that really important break from digesting that does tremendous benefits to our cells of our body.
No, thanks for sharing that. And I hear you speak to a few people asked that they would love to do intermittent fasting. But one of the behaviors that gets in the way of that behavior change is I get headaches. If I don't eat every 3 hours, I get a headache. Or if I don't have breakfast, I have the worst headache by 10 o'clock. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, and I just,
good.
Yeah, I'm going to even say personally, right? I grew up hearing from my parents that yes, if you don't eat enough, you don't eat enough protein, you're going to get a headache, right? Yep. And so certainly there's backing behind that. But I did spend most of my adult life thinking every time I got a headache, it was that I hadn't eaten enough. And after, having this amazing opportunity to build this lifestyle medicine and culinary medicine team and program at a health system, once I changed my diet, after a few days, the headaches went away, right? And so sometimes I'm not suggesting people that it's not real or it's not true. I would just suggest that people kind of give yourself a 5-day break when you cut out some of those other factors that might be producing headaches, or not getting enough sleep, or having too much caffeine, or whatever it might be, sugar, processed foods. Some percentage of headaches do go away. What I would also say is that if morning time is for an individual a time where they find that they get headaches if they don't eat, it doesn't have to be the morning window. Maybe they fast. Maybe they stop eating at 6 p.m. Maybe they move their dinner up, right? And maybe they fast 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. So fasting does not have to be a certain number of hours. Obviously, whenever you sleep is your natural kind of bulk of your fasting hours, but you can add on to that fasting period either before you go to sleep or on either end of the day is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, that could be something also that people can try.
Get creative. You could start at the end. You could do it at the end of the day, beginning of the day, make it work for you, like meet the person where they are.
Exactly.
So let's get to your work. Diet quality is a vital sign. Tell us about your work there.
Yeah, so I'm currently working with the organization called Diet ID. Actually, recently, 2 weeks ago, acquired, really exciting next step by Tangelo. So the Diet ID family is part of the Tangelo family now. Tangelo is a food as medicine organization. And so the Diet ID kind of segment of that organization that I've been working with for the last year is, in my role there as leading strategic partnerships, is Diet ID has a patented digital technology that's scientifically validated that allows someone within 60 to 90 seconds through selection of visual images, measure their diet quality. And so what this tool, again, developed by scientists, brought to life by product engineers, allows individuals to interact with your technology on any mobile internet device and allows them to, in a really easy, fun, engaging way. It's not about taking pictures of what you're eating, but rather you answer a couple of questions about your typical dietary pattern, and then you're presented with images, kind of like when you go to the eye doctor, right? And you're shown 2 images, which one is clearer? You're presented with images and asked to select which of these patterns of eating most resemble yours. And in a really fun, engaging way, right? It gets smarter and smarter based upon your responses, and it informs someone what their dietary pattern style is. Is it Mediterranean? Is it pescatarian? Are they following a whole food plant-based diet? But then it also provides a score from 1 to 10 and gives people an indication from 1 being the lowest quality to 10 being the highest quality diet, where their diet falls. Typically, that kind of assessment is done through a really long food frequency questionnaire that's pages and pages long and takes 30 minutes, or you're asked to keep a diary log for a certain number of days, right? So this makes being able to quantify someone's diet quality much more accessible and scalable. And before working with them, when I had the opportunity to build out a lifestyle medicine medical specialty, we were actually Diet ID's first health system customer. And certainly now their book of business has grown exponentially, but we were the first health system to implement Diet ID that all patients had to take the Diet ID assessment so that we can make diet quality a vital sign. Just like blood pressure is, right? We go to the doctor, we routinely have our blood pressure tested. Now there are many health systems that are integrating this Diet ID assessment as a way to make diet quality a vital sign, because we know how important it is to our health.
If you look at diet, you don't have to die at 70 years old like your parents did and your grandparents did. You can live to 90, 95. you don't need to have the same cardiovascular conditions that your family did. So I remember Dr. Christy Arts, one of your colleagues, was on the show maybe about a year ago, and she said, diseases run in families because diets run in families. And you want to change the diseases that run in your families, change your diet. And then here we are, fast forward to you, but the behavior is so hard to change. Like you said, my parents smoke, my grandparents smoke, my aunt smokes, so I smoke. My family, we all eat a certain way. My grandparents eat a certain way. So I'm going to eat a certain way. And it's how can we break that pattern? And one of the things that your work is in is that digital health. How can digital health help people make like behavior change? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, digital health has just, I mean, exploded, right? It's not even five over the last 10 years. In fact, the conference I was at 2 weeks ago was a digital health conference, 13,000 attendees, all in kind of leadership roles across the country. So we know apps, right, are loaded on our phones, and we all are familiar with the MyFitnessPals and the Headspace, and there's so many tools out there. We are starting to see, fortunately, to some extent, the digital health apps that have the science basis are hopefully, are the ones that we're seeing that are persisting. That was a concern for a while, is that there were so many apps out there. It was hard to tell like which could really help. So I think it kind of even comes back to like behavior change. When we think about apps, they're not the one size fits all solution for all, but they are kind of a tool in our toolbox now, depending on the behavior we're looking to change. Certainly apps out there can help us. Typically it's by helping us stay accountable, right? Helping us to track our behavior, helping us to monitor how our changes are going, right? Even just, those of us that have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or an iPhone, right? Just getting that kind of message at the end of the day of how many steps you took is that gentle nudge. And so I think, some of the greatest things that the digital health technology can bring to us is allowing us to monitor and assess our data, provide those nudges. Where I see a lot of growth happening in digital health, where that science really supports, which I'm excited about, is helping us to connect with others. We know that peer support, I mean, you mentioned, Joe, right? Diets run in families, right? We tend to behave like those around us. And so it can be really difficult if we, come to a point where we really want to we can keep using diet, big changes to our diet, and all of our friends and family members don't eat that way. It's so important for us to find a peer support group that can help us, right? Kind of come back to that Weight Watchers model. Well, now with digital health, there's so many more apps and technologies out there that are trying to build out really robust platforms. We have Facebook, but how can we really create those digital communities all rallied around a particular health area or behavior area that can support each other? And so that's one of the areas within digital health that I'm most excited about. And one of the areas at Diet ID that we've expanded that technology in the last year to include digital communities, because it is so important.
Just to recap, I got three things I kind of just picked up over the last couple of minutes you're speaking of. You're speaking of one, tracking, using digital health to track your progress, right? There's a great Seinfeld story. There was a comedian that went to him and said, Jerry, like, how do you get this great material? How do I become a better comic? And he says, buy a calendar, write jokes every day. And when you write new material, put an X on the calendar and start a streak, and don't break the streak. Don't break the chain. Streak. Yep. Just keep the X's going as long as possible. Right. So digital health can help there. And then second, you said nudges. My wife and I, about a year or two back, discovered the Strata app. It's probably been around for a while. It's new to us. Like a year ago, we probably discovered it. So all our bike rides, walks, hikes, we do the Strata app, and like we're ready to get done. And I'll see, oh, it's 3.8 miles. I'm like, we got to hit 4. So like we just stop, we don't go home, we don't walk in our house, and we walk around the block 3 more times.
Yep.
Till we hit 4, where if it wasn't for that digital technology, we wouldn't have walked as far. So it actually like it nudges you to do more, right? To have a little bit more.
Yep.
And then lastly, you mentioned community, how like you can find like-minded people, right? Like Seth Godin, who's been a guest on the show, he always says, find the others, the other people that are connected to you. And it's funny where like I have a group of people like I train jujitsu with. If there's one group, if I'm within 5 minutes, we're on the ground choking each other, showing new chokes. So like what group you're with is who you're with, is your environment determines who you become, right? So like who you spend the most of your time with is most likely which way you take your life. If you're with people that smoke and drink on Friday night, that's probably the way you're going. If you're with people that get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work out, if that's your community, you're probably going to do that, right? Is that basically
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And then
It's another big place of that friction that we talked about.
it's so much friction. Yeah. It's a, and then also to getting back to the tracking aspect of the digital health, you got the streak. Just say you ate healthy or you worked out or whatever your X chain was. You did the chain for X amount of days. Like, what do you do the day after perfect, right? Like, progress is not linear. You have to be, I guess, hearing what your research shows, you have to be kind to yourself when you fall off on the 7th day and maybe retro back to where you were a month ago. Right? Maybe you go back to your old habit. You have to say, fine, I had a bad day, and just get back onto the new habit, right?
Yep. Yeah. And we see, we see digital health companies building in kind of that, like, be kind to yourself a little bit. I mean, I'm a Peloton treadmill user, right? And so they have streaks, but there's multiple streaks going, right? So certainly I might break my, days in a row streak, but it might be this many weeks in a row that you've done XYZ. At Diet ID, how we've done that is we do weekly challenges and we build in 2 passes, right? So maybe 2 days of the week, 2 passes, right? I'm consulting with an organization on a continuous glucose monitor for monitoring diabetes, and they're adding in, food logging. And so we thought about that and thought about, well, are people really going to log their food every single day, and for how long? And how we address that is having the individual kind of choose the amount of days they're going to log for that week, right? So having some ownership, some autonomy is really important, so that we want to build people up. And like you're saying, Joe, we want to build in that grace or that buffer zone so that they can be human and skip a day and it still be okay.
Yeah, like, be human. Basically, we want to beat the myth of perfection, and we want to sustain change for the long haul.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that's really good.
And that's the slow and steady, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, sure. And then wrapping up the behavior change, I could talk behavior change all day. I find it fascinating. What if you had to do like a 1, 2, 3? Anything from people that wanted to change their diet, maybe smoke less, work out more. Maybe they want to start a writing habit. Like, I wish I wrote a weekly blog and I just can't get back into writing. What are a few steps, like starting small, like some generalized steps to get a new behavior change going and to keep it going? If you could share that.
Yeah. I'd say one of the most powerful things is to think about the why. Like, why do you want to do this, right? What do you, like, depending on the behavior, right? Like, what does it matter? What are the benefits? Like, how's it going to change things? How's it going to make you better? And really, almost no matter what you're trying to change, if you spend some time up front really understanding, like, why, what's going to come out of it, what's in it for you, that can really help propel future progress and really being successful for the long haul. I know we already talked about it to death, but I mean, I can't help but say, like, start small, right? You mentioned whether it's diet, whether it's writing a book, like you mentioned, like, write something, eat something healthy, make one small change, just start somewhere. There's this phrase called chronic contemplation. It's one of those stages of change that I alluded to earlier. So many people are, I'm going to do it. But, next week. Why? Because it always feels overwhelming. So just start, but start small. So I'd say focus on the why, focus on, like, what are you going to get out of it? That's really how to loop back to that first one that I mentioned. That's really how we make the motivation intrinsic, something that we're working towards, and really spending that time thinking about it. And then starting small, doing something, just getting going are the 2 really big things, I'd say.
And if I could add one thing that you said maybe a couple minutes ago, crush the myth of perfection. So let's just say somebody's trying to write something. You have to be comfortable with a crappy first draft. Like, you be comfortable with some bad writing, or be comfortable with like, not an ideal diet, but maybe you had a good meal. Like, maybe one of the 3 meals that day was pretty healthy, and that's a good day to start, right?
So, yep.
So just to recap what you said, think about your why, understand the benefits, why you're doing something. The second one, start small. Just make one small move. Get rid of that, you call it chronic contemplation. Get rid of that.
Yep.
and then get rid of perfect, like destroy the myth of perfect. Just start small and be
Exactly.
comfortable with like a very average first draft or very average first meal, but like you're building something there. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yes.
So
Yeah.
good. So good. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
How about this? Let's just transfer over real quick. This part of the interview we call share your secrets. So our listeners can get to know you a little bit more as a person. Um, Most high achievers like yourself have like a routine, either how to start their day or to end their day. What's your first 30 minutes or last 30 minutes of your day like? What's your routine like?
Can I choose a different time
Yeah,
of
sure.
the day?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Is that
please
okay?
do. Go ahead.
I'd say for me, my regular routine is walking, power walking,
Yeah.
whether that's in my house or outside. And typically, as much as I want that to happen, early, it doesn't. I have children, and whatever the schedule might be, getting out to school. So sometimes it is the end of the day, or sometimes it's early evening or late afternoon. But for me, it's that walking that does the stress management, right? Helps me just get outside, kind of feel calm. But it's also where I do my best thinking. So I have to say, I'm like in my neighborhood, probably that crazy woman everyone sees. Like they think I'm like, on my phone, but it's like all my thoughts. It might be something I'm writing, it might be a
Yeah.
to-do list, but it's like everything just kind of comes out there. And sometimes it's like the great time to catch up with family and friends on the phone. So walking is my that's been my steady my whole life.
Oh, that from Seneca, the Roman philosopher Seneca to Nietzsche, all great thoughts were brought about by walking. It's unbelievable. Walking around and just totally clears your head, clears your mind, and getting outside is just amazing, isn't it? It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
awesome.
And Joe, towards people getting to know me, can I add something funny to the walking story?
Yeah, hit
Like I
me. Go
said,
ahead.
walking's been my steady. And um I have three sons. They're kind of preteen and teen. We've never had a family pet, and they wore us down for 2 years, and we got a puppy several months ago. And so I walk all the time. I see all these people walking their dogs, right? I couldn't wait to have a puppy and walk the puppy. Well, I have had really no experience and had no idea that it takes puppies months, at least the kind we have, to get trained to actually walk. And so I'm like, the dog won't walk, the puppy won't walk, and now the puppy will walk. It's such a naughty puppy when we're walking, right? It's like jumping and causing all this problems. So anyway, my zen, peaceful, I'm gonna think, has turned into managing the puppy. We're getting
Sure.
there, but I just had no idea what I was getting into, and it's disrupted my routine. But we're getting
Uh,
there.
I'm sorry. Good luck with that. What's your dog's name?
Ahsoka, Star Wars character, the breeder named, and
Awesome.
my three boys, loved that it was a Star Wars name, so we kept it.
Oh, Science Pro so that's great. How about this? Has there been a book that either changed the way you think, your mind? Do you have a favorite book?
Um, I do, but of course I'm thinking of a few. But I'm gonna say um, Big Magic, I think by Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yeah, that book is
Yeah, yeah,
awesome.
yeah. I
Big
just read
fan
that
of that one.
a couple years ago during a transition period I was experiencing unexpectedly, and someone suggested it. And gosh, it's I know I love reading and I read often. The whole idea of reading a book a second time, I don't often, but
That
that's
one.
one that I've read again and will again.
That story, she said, the one story that it just lasts for me in that book is the one where she had this writing project in her head and she never did anything with it. She just had that you called it that chronic
Chronic
contemplation.
contemplation.
Yeah, she had that. And then she gave up on it like the day before or something. And she's talked to another author. And an author's like, I just came up with this great idea. And the author, who she never talked about, described her writing project to the T, like even the craziest minute details. And she's like, the universe took it from her and gave it to the other author. And it's like,
Sure.
it
Yeah,
was weird. Did you remember that part of the book? That part,
I do. I do.
that part
Yes.
was crazy. I
Yeah.
thought that was like almost like psychic. That was wild. Cool, cool. How about this? As you look out to the year ahead, what's the most exciting project you're working on now?
Oh, I would say right now, as I mentioned, gosh, I'm just trying to think of some of the other side projects, but really, like I mentioned, I'm working with Diet ID, and we just came together with this organization called Tangelo. And in California, um, Medicaid there has really tremendous benefits for those with chronic disease to have medically tailored meals delivered to their home.
Mhm.
And so I'm working with that team to help build dietitian support and education and coaching to complement those meals being delivered, so that when that meal benefit runs out, people are prepared to keep up, make those hard diet changes that we were talking about. But it's so meaningful because these are individuals that not only, are struggling with food and income security, but also chronic conditions. So it's just really big impacts, and really excited about the work being supported in California and being able to have a contribution towards those efforts.
Awesome. We spoke about digital health and apps. We spoke about that quite a bit. If everyone listening had to download one app, what's the app they need to download?
I don't know. I was worried you were going to ask me that, because I get asked that question, and
How about give me two?
I'm gonna.
Give me your favorite two or
Can
three
I do
then.
this? Isn't this? I mean, I'm not. I think it is so dependent upon what that individual is wanting to do with that app, right? I'm a huge fan of Headspace.
Yeah.
If I was to say one that I have had and used regularly for years, that my children have used, my family have used, I have found that that's one that's like really meets people where they are with meditation and calmness, and has been able to be a support for my family in so many ways. So I hate to hedge on that question, but I feel like it's so personal. But that's one that I would say, if you haven't tried, because so many people, myself included, like meditation, mindfulness, they feel like, oh, that's like, I don't do that. Like, I don't know what that's like. And Headspace has done a phenomenal job, really, baby steps into it, and in really, way that people can consume it. So I'd say Headspace.
Fair enough. I know it's nuanced, but I appreciate that. Appreciate the answer. We spoke about a lot. We covered digital health, behavior, all your work in behavior change, small steps. If you could have everyone listening take just one lesson away from everything we discussed over the last hour, what would that lesson be?
That lesson would be, I think, taking like back to like thinking about their why, taking a few moments to just, reflect on their health and their health behaviors. Because a lot of times we're just so busy in life, we're running. We're not even stopping and thinking about what we're doing or what we're not doing. So I'd say to like, just to even jumpstart any of those other strategies or things we talked about, the first step is just pausing and reflecting for a moment, thinking about your health and your health behaviors. And, if you could, what would you change? Just start there. Where would you start?
Almost like a self-awareness, like know thyself. Basically, pause,
Yeah.
reflect, take a moment, like basically
Yeah.
figure out what's your change and what's your why, basically.
Yep. And it goes back to the like meeting people where they are, right? If we and doing that early preparation work for successful change, right? It's so easy, like, go join a gym, or, buy healthy food that's going to go bad in the fridge, right? We tend to like want to act and do something, and we often miss those early steps that truly is the foundation, right? That's how, when we're successful with change, that's typically how it happens, is we stop with that just reflection and awareness.
Yeah, because sometimes when you join the gym, your mind feels like you did something, even though you never worked out. Like, oh, I joined the gym. I signed up for $10
Exactly.
a
I'm
month.
going to do it. Yeah.
You signed up, you got your little keychain where you could scan, and like you felt like you accomplished something, and you go about what you're normally doing, right? It's pretty funny how the mind works. Eric, two fun questions to wrap up. This is a fun question. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Oh,
If
no.
Leanne, if you could spend the day with anyone, historical figure, famous, not famous, alive or dead, who would you spend the day with?
I'm going to go with Oprah Winfrey. I just also, I mean,
Nice.
I've always been like a huge fan, but I just
Yeah.
finished a podcast, We Could Do Hard Things by Glennon Doyle. I don't know if you're familiar with that podcast, but it's one of them, one that I follow, and just listen to a podcast with Oprah Winfrey. So it's kind of renewed my love and enthusiasm for all the good that she's done.
Her book, What I Know for Sure. I saw it in the book. I saw a great write-up on it. I'm like, all right, here's a person who became a billionaire. Maybe I can learn something from him. Right. I read it, and it's one of my favorite books ever. What I Know for Sure. Amazing book. Last question. Dr. Leanne Mauriello, if you had to get a quote or a saying tattooed on your body, what would that quote or motto say?
It's a tough one. I think it would say, I know, long pause, right?
Yeah.
Ah, I think lately I would say I'm enough.
Awesome.
I'm
Oh,
enough.
drop the mic.
I know. I was like, am I
Put it
saying
out.
it?
Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, they're just,
I am enough.
there's
That's a play that
I'm
took a
enough.
long time to come out of the huddle, but they executed it. You got like 27 yards. That was like a 27-yard
Yeah, yeah.
screenplay for a
I
first.
mean, there's so much in life, right? We're always
Let's
trying to
go.
achieve more, more, and more, be more, more, and more. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
sometimes it's okay to just stop and say, you know what? I'm good.
I am enough. That is fantastic. I think I am enough is about as good as a spot to end as any. Dr.
You
Leanne,
said on my body, right? So it's
yeah,
something that you're
yeah,
looking at all the time. So
that's
that
perfect.
reminder that I need.
If people are looking for you and what you
Mm,
do online, where can we find you?
yeah. I actually about a year ago or so, it started a consulting business. So I do that on the side. So, but also just talks about my career and different ways that I'm working. So Evolve Health Advisors is where you can find me. Evolve Health Advisors, and then those on LinkedIn. Certainly, check out Leanne Mauriello on LinkedIn. I've updated that in the last little bit as well. But yeah, Evolve Health Advisors will talk a lot about the health transformation work and the science behind it, and different ways we could collaborate if anyone's interested.
That is awesome. Dr. Leanne Mauriello, I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile and your website, Evolve Health Advisors, online. I'd like to thank you for joining us. Thank you for walking us through behavior change, how to accomplish our goals, digital health, just living a healthy life in general. Really, really appreciate your time and wish you much success.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Joe. It was a pleasure. So grateful for the opportunity. So thank you.